We're not through yet.
7 days a week.
You'll be amazed at what my Auric XL, even at 8.5 pounds, picked up.
Call us now.
Call us now. Call now, and I'll also send you my Auric compact vacuum absolutely free.
Your credit card ready.
Hey, hello. Hey, can you hear me? Hey, can you hear me? Hello? Hey.
Welcome to Emerging Tech Mastery, a show that demystifies cutting-edge technology like cryptocurrency, the blockchain, metaverse, NFTs, virtual reality, the maker movement, artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud, edge, and even fog computing. Strap in as we ride into the fourth industrial revolution. Emerging Tech Mastery provides actionable knowledge, regardless of skill level, from experts in the trenches. We piece together this intel in easy-to-consume media formats, processes, and procedures. See you in the future.
Hey everybody, Aaron Mangal here with another episode of Emerging Tech Mastery, and I have a fantastic guest today, someone I met several years back, and their project was very fledgling at that time, but now it has grown. That person would be Justin Guidici. He is the co-founder and head of product for Telos. Justin, so great to connect again, and thanks so much for coming on. So let's start by having you tell us about yourself and your background.
Great to be here. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I've got a background in emerging tech, which is really great since the name of the podcast. Things like web design, development, always been interested in AI, machine learning. And you know, like back in years ago, I first discovered Bitcoin. I was buying something online, and I thought it was pretty cool. You know, very, very interesting, this like digital currency and the way it was mined and everything. But, you know, like I didn't see it taking off because of the fees and that sort of. So it was actually like years later that, you know, myself and 150 others sort of like found each other out of the EOS launch. We wanted to build something like EOS with all the technology, but we wanted to build, you know, some improvements, some rather major improvements to governance. We saw what things like Bitcoin could do, but, you know, obviously with the high fees and the slow transactions, that doesn't really work. We also saw things like, you know, Steam and the ability to, you know, incentivize your community to post social content. And so, you know, we ended up choosing like the EOS.io code base that EOS was built on and building something brand new as a community to fill that gap, but do it better than what we saw other projects doing. So yeah, I found my way through all these different cryptocurrencies to the beginning of Telos, and I was amongst so many different people who were willing to contribute their time essentially for free. I think we split off like 6% to divide amongst all the contributors who are building out the governance, the code, business development, all the documentation and everything in between. And we ended up launching this project Telos, which enables apps to build the value layer of the internet on for their applications and, you know, do things like you could do on Steam, but with more flexibility, I guess.
So, you know, it's funny because if I heard you right on a previous interview, you mentioned you found Bitcoin a little boring, which I guess it wouldn't be boring to get the gains. But I think if I'm hearing you right, Bitcoin, I've heard some people call it lovingly or maybe not so lovingly a space rock, which I think is a really funny way to put it. But maybe go into a little bit of like, what was it that you thought could be more interesting than Bitcoin? And certainly Bitcoin's the OG, it was there first, but you saw something else. You saw something beyond that. And I think that's something easy to miss for newcomers. And I really want to make sure we highlight what was it that you saw in Bitcoin, maybe even that what got you excited, but then what did you see that got you more excited with these other, you know, chains and opportunities to build on those?
Yeah, that's a great question, Aaron. I mean, with Bitcoin, like I agree, it's like a space rock. It's the gold of the Web3 value layer world. It's great. Or what I saw in it was that it was completely transparent. You could see how many Bitcoin were being issued and that there'd be a limit of 21 million. And, you know, you have this ability to mine it, you know, initially using like video cards, CPUs, and then now ASIC miners. And so there's a lot of great qualities of Bitcoin in, you know, what you're getting is very simple. in order to create it, you need to spend money in terms of electricity and the cost of hardware. And it does a great job of just being simple money that you can trust. That has value. But then there's a need for other kinds of money. So with Telos and other DPoS blockchains or layer one blockchains, you have the ability to program that money to have smart contracts essentially. And that enables you to create like incentivization schemes for a DApp, whether it's a game, a social media network. You can program that money to say, hey, if you get so many likes, if you get so many follows, if you get so many retweets or whatever, you get X amount of value in a native token. And you can build that token on top of Telos. And, with Telos, you pay for your transaction fees. So this is like a sort of like a Visa or MasterCard layer that is much more powerful, where you can build currencies on top of it. Yeah, there's just so many possibilities that this can open up. I mean, even with NFTs as well, like, you have simple stuff like JPEGs and like baseball cards and awesome collectibles, don't get me wrong, but they're very simple. But then like later on, we're going to have things like property that is represented by an NFT. With that property NFT, you can handle a full settlement where the contract says that the ownership has to be in that smart contract and the amount that is being paid needs to be in that smart contract, and then that smart contract will hand off the money and the NFT respectively to the opposing party who purchasing or selling. Like, there's just so much cool stuff that having to go through a house settlement takes several days and you got to pay a settlement agent. It's very frustrating. Online banking is very frustrating in that it's, only works 9 to 5. Sometimes there's a 3-day wait. There's bank holidays, there's weekends, there's all this other stuff. So what we're building with Telos and any layer one is just like a very functional layer you can do almost like magical things with, once you know what you're doing.
One thought I've had a lot is the Bitcoin maxis would probably chime in and say, well, you could build that on Bitcoin. So really quick, if you could touch on delegated proof of stake, which is what Telos is based on, and EOS.io, now Antelope.io, is based on this system. But I think a lot of people can't grasp this plumbing that's going on behind the scenes. So maybe touch on a little bit of like the differences there and why you can do that on these layer ones, as you put it, versus, why can't you just do it on Bitcoin, right? I can hear the maxis saying right now.
Obviously, like Bitcoin has quite a lengthy block time, and that's partly due to, it's completely due to the fact that it's a proof of work blockchain. As I was talking about earlier, like with Bitcoin, it requires these ASIC miners. They're basically solving a puzzle, and they get given Bitcoin if they solve it before others. And it's just very energy intensive. It's very slow. It's very costly. So in Bitcoin, there's this thing called hash rate. Whoever has the most powerful computers has the most say in the network. And that's sort of how voting and consensus works. Like, consensus over this next transaction is legit or it's not legit. That's all powered by this hash rate, i.e. like basically who has the most powerful computers. And that's an interesting way to vote on things and push transactions through. Whereas Telos, on the other hand, works via delegated proof of stake, which is probably a little bit more familiar to people, because it works somewhat like how shares or stock work. You have a distribution of people owning tokens, and the more stock or tokens that they own, crypto's case, the more vote that they have over who is validating the transactions on the network. So Telos has a top 21 validators or block producers. These are the operators of servers who are validating transactions, essentially. And then there's standby validators as well. So as I said, they're all voted in through voting with your tokens, and that's basically how consensus is reached. You have the top 21 deciding what transactions are passed. So on Telos, you only have 21 active validators, whereas on Bitcoin, it can have thousands. Having said that, when you reduce it to just 21, you can push through transactions much more faster. And given it's utilizing regular servers, the energy usage is considerably lower to the ASIC miners that are used on Bitcoin. So on Telos, all in all, we have like half-second block time. So a transaction is pushed through within half a second, which is pretty amazing. You can do tens of thousands of transactions transactions per second on the native layer. And we've also got our EVM, which can do 14,000 transactions per second. And on Bitcoin, you're talking, I don't know what it is at the moment, like 7 transactions that it can do at any given time. It's very, very small. And if we're going to essentially hit the mainstream, if we're going to start to take over from Visa and MasterCard and all the different things that transactions are pushed on, we need to get into these tens of thousands of transactions per second, even millions of transactions. So it requires a better efficiency to achieve that.
You had mentioned Antelope IO, which is formerly called EOS IO, and you had mentioned it's built on C++, which I think is great, get in the weeds a little bit. But why did you decide to build on that? Because if I remember right, there were a couple other, or maybe a handful of other fledgling DPoS chains. And I know EOS had this whole layer one, be the best thought from the beginning. So I'm just curious how you came to Antelope IO. And then you guys also made some changes with Telos, which I think is super fascinating. We'll get into. But yeah, tell us a little bit about how you encountered that blockchain, and how do you go about even looking at these technologies? I mean, that was such an early time, and I think that's another thing I just want to point out is the landscape, I'm sure you can agree, was so different when you guys started, even years before that, so different. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that exploration.
Yeah, it's a really great question. I mean, it was a completely different time to what we see now, where there's like Phantom, Avalanche, and Solana, and all these different technologies that scale reasonably well. Back in like 2017, 2018, like EOS was being built out. At the time, like it was the only scalable technology that was coming to fruition. I mean, there might have been Lisk and a few others, but they were pretty early and had their own issues. I guess there was Steam, but Steam was sort of built for one singular application. It was built for social media essentially, so it was very configured for that. Whereas we needed a technology that serviced multiple different application types, whether it was social media, whether it was DeFi, whether it was something else. And the EOS.io code base, or what is called Antelope, really being built for like a multi-chain future, and for it was very modular as well, which allowed customized governance. You have these things called system contracts, and any chain can utilize this base software called Antelope, which is almost like an operating system for blockchains. And they can configure, how consensus works, whether it's 21 validators or 50 validators or 100 validators, or how the community decides on tokenomic changes or anything. Like you can build that into custom system contracts, and yet you can still upgrade to the latest versions of Antelope without too much trouble at all. Like that's the beauty of like modular software, I guess. And to this date, I don't think there's anything really out there that is as modular and also as scalable as what we have with Antelope. So we've been very, very happy and fortunate that we did choose that software as our base layer.
Yeah, and you kind of think about such critical moments in history, because like if you had chosen a different chain, you're sort of at the whim of that core code bases, almost like corporate. I know we're in sort of decentralized world of code, so that term isn't quite the same in the way I mean it, but it's kind of like there's this core, core, Bitcoin core, right? So there's a core team of developers who maintain this certain, amount of code and keep it really strong and robust. I mean, even Bitcoin, to their credit, they were very careful about not overly expanding at these earlier times. So I think that's also one reason why, people look at DPoS and say, oh, is it possible? Is it not? But then again, it's like, but look at all the complexity going on top. So I think it's been such a formative choice, frankly. And luckily now we have this coalition where you had people from Telos, UX, Wax, and of course EOS.io have come together in this coalition. And that's been so fascinating. How do you think that coalition has built your confidence or helped overall? And the gentleman from Wax, I believe his name was Lucas, he really, to me, rang the bell of how kind of serious things were getting. I mean, they're doing a lot of volume, just to put it in perspective. Huge NFT platform, tons of mainstream people on there, right? So it felt like they were really under the gun of dealing with these loads. So, how do you feel like this coalition has maybe shifted, or has it built confidence? Has it built sort of some positive direction? What's your take on the coalition?
Yeah, no, it's been a really exciting change. I mean, for those who don't know, our code base was formerly maintained by a company called Block One. They did a massive ICO where they raised $4 billion from EOS stakeholders. But then there were like issues where they were trying to protect the funding that they had raised, trying not to do anything that would make EOS a security, and also kind of they had stakeholders within their company, VCs who, wanted them to utilize that money to make the most money possible. And so it really misaligned their interests away from maintaining the software that they had sort of promised to maintain, which was called EOSIO at the time. And so that created a lot of problems, and they ended up focusing a lot of their changes to EOSIO on what their own needs were, which were like building a project called Voice, which was formerly like a medium like Web3 platform, and then it turned into an NFT platform, and then more recently building a exchange called Bullish. So they started to work on the EOSIO code base, but focus their efforts on what their commercial needs were. And these commercial needs were drastically different to the needs of the public decentralized networks like Telos, EOS, Wax, and UX, and what their needs were. So us all coming together to, decide to maintain the code ourselves has meant that we can prioritize the things that are really important. And like you were talking about, like, I think some of the things that Lucas from Wax brought up were things that were critical to, most of our chains, particularly Telos. Like, we really want to service hundreds of millions of users, billions of users, and that's our aim. So the fact that the way that the software worked in using so much RAM for each account and all these other sorts of issues put like a cap of like 10, 15, 20 million users on who can join the network is a really serious issue that we're now working to solve. So yeah, again, we're very grateful that our fellow, I guess, like chains have decided to come together with us and build out Antelope.io, the new code base. And we're really excited where things are going in terms of like IBC, fast finality, the ability to really change up the consensus with the hot stuff algorithm. There's just so much cool stuff that's coming together that is really going to change the game for what we can do as a network, and it's really going to impact the other networks as well. What we have coming together is almost like the Linux of blockchain, which I think is really exciting and much needed.
So you're bringing up such a great point. Linux, a blockchain. Wow, that's a huge, that's a big ask there. But I actually feel like I'm seeing what you're saying, and here's why. Eve, who is in charge of the EOS Foundation right now, he mentioned on, and again, I'll link to this Talking Heads if anyone wants to really dive in here, and I encourage you to. He said, we're basically competing chains, but we see this bigger picture and are willing to work together. And I thought that was such a cool perspective in this world of like my layer one, your layer one, that layer one, this layer one. It's a very us versus them. This just feels so collaborative. And in this world of sort of, abrasive, harsh, dare I say even toxic, blockchain industry, not the least of which is the government's behavior, the US government's behavior towards a lot of these projects, especially on US soil, has been just so difficult. So it's really quite cool to see this collaboration, dare I even call it co-opetition. And it's just, frankly, as you said, exciting and really nice to see everyone tying incentives together. And even if people go in their different directions, it really shows that you still want that core robust structure to be in place. Not to mention, this whole thing's open source, right? So anyone could jump on and clone or make improvements. So that's such an interesting occurrence, frankly.
Yeah. And yeah, the more I think about it, the more apt it is. I mean, you look at Linux and, I know the Linux Foundation gets contributions from all different companies like Microsoft, Google, probably like Netflix, all the FANG companies, various other companies, they all contribute to Linux. They're all multi-billion dollar, sometimes even trillion-dollar companies that are all benefiting and running like millions probably of servers globally, running very, very successful businesses and all sharing the same amazing software. Yeah, it's just an amazing benefit to the world when we can all agree to cooperate together and build something that we can all share and utilize and still make essentially a bunch of money off. It's just going to be really exciting to see what businesses are built off this software, whether they're running their own Antelope chain or they're building off one of these public Antelope chains like Telos. There's just so many amazing businesses and DAOs and projects to come. And I'm sure we'll see something like Linux in 10 years where just basically everything is running, or just so many companies and projects are running off this base software.
Just to kind of get a little bit in the details of Telos, what are some problems or maybe I should say additional modifications or use cases that you saw that were not able to be done on ESIO, hence, creating a new chain? And what did you seek to improve from the original code and also the chain management? Because I think that's something easy to miss. There's a lot of management, if not the core feature of delegated proof of stake is this sort of management layer. You used the stock analogy earlier, which I think is fantastic. Even though we're in this block, it's very a different material than a stock, right? Because there's no third party that's saying, here's this stock, it's approved by the US government and Wall Street. No, it's approved by the community and all of us being involved. But with that said, you still saw something, right? So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about what you sought to improve?
I'll definitely touch on something that really relates to what you're referring to there with the community involvement. One of the big changes that we made to the code or built on top of the code was this Telos amend system. It's probably one of my favorite features, and that enables the community to pose, say, tokenomic changes. The vote gets put up, the community votes on it. Depending on the weight or the amount of tokens they have, that contributes to getting these proposals over the line. At the moment, I think an amend proposal takes about 65% yes vote to be passed and put into place. And we've seen several different Telos economic development proposals that have tweaked the tokenomic, that have freed up tokens, build, great big initiatives. And it's been incredibly successful, and it makes the community an integral part of any major decision. Recently, we proposed the creation of, I think it was around 60 million tokens dedicated to building out what we're calling Telos Zero, which is going to be like a multi-chain EVM deployment. We're going to have ZK rollup. It's going to basically enable unlimited scalability, new use cases, lots of exciting things that, serve use cases that are currently untapped. Alongside that, it is also enabling major partnerships. We recently announced a partnership with GameStop. We're going to be working closely with them, or we are working closely with them, bringing on new projects into Web3 to the player web store that they have launched, or will be launching rather. So, that took the community coming together to vote on that. It's an important thing. It involves inflating the token supply. The community basically unanimously voted, yes, we do want to do this. We see the value it brings. We feel that it's going to bring more value than the cost of doing that. This is an example where Telos differs vastly from Bitcoin, which is very, very rigid. The community can't propose or do anything. With Telos, the community can come together and make a great big leap together and make a big decision. And that's very exciting. So I think Telos Amend is probably one of my favorite features and one of the things that we innovated from the base code. There's also, so many different things. We've got Telos EVM we built. It's sort of like a layer one on top of Telos native, or now what we're calling Telos Zero. It's basically the fastest Ethereum virtual machine in the world. It basically means you can run Ethereum smart contract with half-second block times and 14,000 transactions per second, which I think is pretty amazing. Whereas on Ethereum, obviously, it does 7 to 14 transactions per second. Fees can go as high as $50 or $100, or sometimes even $200. It just creates a vastly better user experience and new different use cases because of the cost disparity. So those are just two examples of great innovations that Telos has come up with and delivered.
This is just the tip of the iceberg. Before we recorded, I think we agreed that there was going to be a lot of little rabbit holes and things that we could zoom into. So we don't intend to sort of cover everything that Telos is, but we're trying to sort of highlight some key points so that people, whether they're new or veterans to this space, can kind of get some like digging sites, if you will, to really add on to this. Why don't we go into sort of the bigger picture? I mean, one thing I've observed from this is that it appears that the way it appears to me, you put people first. Not to say that EOS didn't put people first, but there's sort of this cartel-like nature, which is very common with delegated proof of stake. I'm not pointing any fingers, where you have, as you said about the VCs for block one, I mean, that was a very interesting side note there, by the way. It's like, look, groups of people that are in some kind of commerce or organization, they want to self-enrich. Look at corporations. No surprise there. So I don't think it's actually weird or bad. It's actually, like we had said before we recorded, the tech is working as intended. So could you touch a little bit on how you put people first with this? And what I specifically mean is how you were treating the BPs. One thing I noticed from your white paper, you made the standby people maybe not exactly as important as the main ones, because I know, if I'm not mistaken, they're getting paid half of the main BPs, but that's actually a very good rate considering that on EOS, it could have been a fraction, right? Like you could have been earning a 10th or maybe even a 100th of what these top BPs were earned, which, I think you were being really nice about saying it, but, there kind of creates this like cartel or like, walled garden or like ivory tower. It's like Wall Street all over again. You're not in, you're out. So how did you approach that? And what do you think have been some of the results from structuring things differently on a management level?
Yeah, I think that's a great example of how we've done things different to try and put the community, in this case, the block producers or the validators first. On EOS, with the default configuration, basically the more votes you get, the more you get paid, and it scales all the way down. And the way they have set up their voting, at least my opinion and a lot of other people's opinions, creates this basically vested interest in kind of setting up your own BP and colluding with other BPs and getting trading votes and all this sort of thing. And we've done it like quite a different way. You mentioned like the stable pay for top 21 and then exactly half pay for the standby positions, that's part of the equation of avoiding that situation of just vote trading. The other part is we have inverse weighted voting. So voters are encouraged to vote for 30 block producers, whereas on other ecosystems, like you sort of are incentivized to just vote for one block producer or just your block producer and your friend's block producers. All these things in combination, and I'll probably add in another really key difference we've got, and that is that each block producer needs to be completely independently run. You need to announce essentially who is the owner of this block producer. It can be checked by others. And there's sort of like a culture of enforcement of validating whether these are independent block producers. And like in the early days, there was one or two block producers that got kicked essentially because it was proven without doubt that they were run by the same person or they were run by a husband and wife. And that sort of stuff doesn't sort of happen anymore. Yeah, so all these different things together sort of help to create a better environment where the best validators, the best governors get put first. And it's not a culture of everyone just trying to enrich themselves. And because of the way we launched our project without a major pre-mine, without, major whales, you basically have the stakeholders have the most control over the network, not insiders. So they very much vote like they would vote a board in a traditional public organization, which I think is a relatively good thing, or at least that's a positive part of traditional organizations. So we're happy to inherit some of the positives. Other than that, in terms of putting the people first, I mean, I've already mentioned it, but it's worthy of going into more deeper perhaps. Not doing a major fundraising event at the start of our launch, not doing like pre-seed rounds half off, for VCs. This is very common practice with just about every other project out there other than like the Bitcoins of this world. They create this dichotomy, I guess you would call it, where there's just like one rule for these people and then another rule for these other people. And because of the way we launched, admittedly, Telos was not that attractive to VCs at first because, they wanted these special deals. But over the years, like Telos and our community has really proven ourselves. We've just continued to build. We've continued to show the world what we can do with very little funding. And it's gotten to a point where VCs, without even asking for anyone's permission, have bought in at the fair market rate, which I think is a very positive thing. We do want VCs and, super independent investors who are quite wealthy. We do want all of these different types of investors to come in. We just want it to be a fair environment for everyone. And I think that's what we've really found with Telos, where there's a lot of people who got in early that still have a decent say, but, no one can really control the voting on anything.
See, this is good to hear because I think there is a little bit of, maybe negative perception of VCs, and there's a good reason why. Like, I heard this maybe like in the last bull run, people talking about how crypto's kind of become this like super ultra flipping game. And it's because of exactly what you said. They got in at a penny, then they sell to their friends for like 3 cents. I mean, this would be beyond the scope of this chat, but just to really quickly touch on it, there's people that get that 1 cent, then they call their rich friend up and they flip it for 3 cents. And maybe those guys call someone else up and flip it for 6 cents. And then all of a sudden the public's invited for 10 cents. And that is such a bad look because it's literally the public price is like 10 times that original VC price. And I think that right there leaves a huge negative taste in people's mouths. And frankly, maybe it's good that a bunch of time went by the time you started, that we had these memories of just poor behavior and specifically just not putting the community first. So that's really cool to hear that you made that really a priority. And I'd love to touch on you use the term equitable decentralization in a past interview, which I thought was a great term. But this is everything you've said. Like, I'm almost reverse asking the question because you already basically answered it. But this is basically what a DAO is, decentralized autonomous organization, which I think is a little bit of a misnomer because autonomous, yeah, sort of. We need to vote. We need to show up. We need to be involved. So I do think that's a really interesting feature there that I don't know if you agree with this, but that sounds to me like what a so-called DAO should operate like. Everyone comes in, everyone has a fair vote, but if you do have greater resources, you're welcome to come in just the same as everyone else. I mean, that's actually a really nice look. Also on the part of the VCs that they were willing to come in at a fair market value, which I think you had mentioned in the past. They're just buying in like anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to touch on there, but yeah, I mean, this really is the promise of the DAO. Everyone has been raving about what decentralized autonomous organizations could do, like the things that communities could build together if they existed. And yet, we see every project do a fundraising event and pretty much operate entirely like a regular centralized organization. And Telos is like one of the very, very few projects that actually eating their own dog food, and sort of we're using the ability for we've used the smart contracts and the way they operate and tokens in the way that everyone's been promising, and actually built something from nothing, built something without any fundraising, people working on the promise that something may or may not actually be worth anything, but they're wanting to contribute either way, and showing that can actually be done. I think that's really key, and really, like, there's so few projects where I actually have seen that. I mean, Bitcoin is really one of them. Even Ethereum did a fundraising event early on.
So one thing I wanted to touch on before we get into sort of IBC and such was, let's talk a little bit about sort of the services or features that Telos offers. You see out there this chain saying they're the best, they're the fastest transactions, and you see a lot of Me Too services. So how are you approaching, services and use cases, and especially in this world of everyone kind of putting out the same marketing terms? And, I will say, again, I'm not being paid by you guys here. You guys seem to have just aimed to lead through actually it working or it being proven or it actually happening versus writing it on the marketing and then just hope maybe some people will believe in that. So how have you approached that? And, where do you draw the line of like a Me Too service? Like, okay, everyone has liquidity pools or staking, but you guys seem like you're really aiming to push the envelope. You did mention you want billions of users, which is a pretty great goal. I mean, who knows? Might have to increase that number when more people come on the internet, right? But yeah, tell us a little bit about that. What are some of the features and services you offer, and how does that differ from what's out there?
Yeah, you're certainly right in that there is a lot of like Me Too, the same exact service offered, and that's partly good and it's partly bad. I mean, for example, we have our Ethereum virtual machine. One of the great things is that like you can deploy standard Ethereum contracts to it. That's really positive, but on the negative side, well, there's a lot of other EVMs. But we do try and differentiate in, I think, ways that create better product. I mean, we have, for example, no front running on our EVM. That means that basically, on Ethereum and other EVMs, you have this gas bidding service in terms of creating a transaction where, if you pay more for a transaction, if you spend more gas, you can insert your transaction in front of another person's transaction. And in theory, this sounds amazing. Like, yeah, if you are willing to pay more, why shouldn't you be able to jump front of the line? But, in terms of a practicality, this actually creates this thing called front running or sandwich trading. If someone is buying, say, Bitcoin on the Telos network using USD, say they're buying a very large amount of Bitcoin on the Telos network. On these other networks, there's a mempool, which is basically a very transparent, visible pool where you can see what transactions are going in next. If you can see that someone is placing a large order to buy Bitcoin and you understand how these AMMs or DEXs work, whereas that will push up the price, you can basically pay more or track that this is happening, pay more gas than the person who is about to put their transaction in, and basically front run them, put your transaction in first, buy Bitcoin first, wait for them to buy their Bitcoin, and then sell back into the AMM or DEX. And this practice basically allows you to squeeze value from that person who was buying Bitcoin. So that person who was buying Bitcoin, the first person, they will pay more for their Bitcoin, and you will be able to sell back into the market and basically extract a difference, a profit margin. But this is something that is totally illegal in the NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, and pretty much any trading market in the traditional world. But in crypto, it's common practice. And the way we see it is, if things are going to go mainstream, then why would people put up with this practice? I mean, I've been front run myself. I've bought $1,000 worth of Ethereum, and it sucked paying $1,050 essentially, or rather actually, paying $1,000 and only getting $950 worth of Ethereum. I've seen, maybe not with Ethereum because they're pretty liquid, but I've seen with other purchases, I've paid more because someone has front run me. So I think that's a really great example of how we're differentiating. But as you sort of alluded to, we're also looking to the future in other ways, looking to how we can scale for, millions of users. And we think that that's going to require, different kinds of layer ones and layer twos that roll up with zero knowledge proofs and that allow us to, offer more users, which I think is really going to be fantastic. It also allows us to service new use cases that currently are very underserved. I think one example of this is privacy. The way I see it is that if we're going to take over, banking and even point of service payments, that's not going to happen on a completely transparent network. When you go to the shops, you buy coffee at Starbucks or buy McDonald's or whatever you're doing, you really don't want to have a record of that, everyone to just dive in and see what you've been buying. That's just not how the world works currently. You have a bank account, you go buy things, and sure, your bank can see the transactions, and maybe the government can actually apply to get those records, but it's generally relatively private. With one version of what we are building out, we're looking to enable private transactions, whether you're using USD or whatever, and we're hoping to get this eventually into point of service retailers and even have it being used for people's banking, where you sort of log in and it's almost a Web 2 experience. You see everything that you've done. You can send transactions to others. They can see those transactions, but no one can see transactions when they're not involved. And this, I think this sort of technology will also open itself up to sharing your medical records with your doctor and then being able to revoke those permissions for your doctor, and sharing keys and other things, and storing the ownership of houses and other things that you own, cars and everything in between that maybe you don't want to tell the world that you own. So I think that's where the world is going. If we're going to actually start to replace Web 2, we need to be thinking a little bit more outside the box. We need to be thinking a little bit about scalability and how do we get there. And I think Telos is really pushing things in a way that other networks really aren't thinking about. They're really just thinking about what's in front of them with DeFi. And we are too, but we're also looking at the bigger vision of how we start to service all these people who haven't come into Web3 and blockchain.
It's funny because I see you have code behind the scenes, and then there's like, how do you make that code in a, for lack of a better term, user interface, right? So how have you guys approached that? Have you made that a priority? Like, there's all this complexity, and you could go through 10 different chains and like maybe even connect them together behind the scenes. But then how do you think about that being presented in front of the user? Do you find that, as you said, long term, I'm talking big picture here, not necessarily the tech nerds that actually care about how those pipes were actually set up together, do you find that as part of that forward thinking vision, how does UI play a part of that in design? And, is that a critical piece to this? Or would you say the code kind of needs to be really ironclad first? Or are they both kind of being built together at the same time and have equal importance potentially?
Yeah, I think you raise a very valid point of how do we make this so usable, like having all these different chains. And it is quite a challenge. I mean, we're taking a number of different approaches, partnering with different solutions out there. Like we're partnered with, or they're building a really nice wallet for us and a login system essentially that uses like OAuth, Facebook, Google. You can log in with any of them, and you can log in with Telos Zero or Telos EVM. You have the choice of logging into either. And I think this will graduate over time where it's almost like, say, your bank account where you have a savings account and a checking account and maybe a trading account, But it does need to evolve. It does need to get much, much better. And we're building out block explorers. We're building out wallet UIs that really can service multi-chain. And yeah, we realize there is really far to go. And there's a lot of different approaches we can take. And we're sort of trialing and erroring, trying each of them. I think we probably will see, access through common RPCs that gives you access to multiple different chains or networks without you even realizing that you're jumping between them. We don't know exactly how this will work, but I think it's something that we would like to see built. It's just a matter of getting one thing done first.
Yeah, prioritization, that could be a whole separate show. Again, not quite on the tech side, but the management side is so fascinating with all this. But you kind of gave me a nice segue here with a multi-chain comment, which is, what is the inter-blockchain, also known as IBC protocol, and how do you see that affecting crypto and blockchains as a whole, not to mention, of course, Telos itself?
Yeah, I mean, we have a very exciting product in Antelope IBC that, we've contributed financially to in the Antelope Coalition. It's actually built by the dev team from UX Network. It's inter-blockchain communication, and it's a trustless version of this. And it basically allows messages to be passed from one blockchain to another trustlessly. And obviously the most common use of this is to send asset between chains, send telos between Telos and EOS or WAX or UX, or even NFTs, passing NFTs between chains, which is really awesome. But there's also an expansive world of how this messaging might be used for other things, and maybe potentially to create user experiences that feel like you're just using one chain and really connecting this web of blockchains up to feel like a new internet, as opposed to a bunch of different independent networks stitched together, which is currently the case at the moment. So we're really excited to see how that develops. I think like people having flexibility to move their assets wherever they want to different platforms, wherever they're built on, to OpenSea, which is the biggest NFT marketplace in the world at the moment. It's really important to have flexibility. I think that's part of decentralization, the ability to choose where you go and where you do things and who you trust or what code you trust. It's really critical, and we're going to see this develop.
We get in our own little crypto world. So I had been poking my head up a little bit, out of the crypto bunker, and I was looking at XR or mixed reality space. And there's something really interesting happening there, which is there's a discussion of interoperability and compatibility. And I'm talking specifically from a file format perspective. And so I think it's so interesting. I wouldn't actually be surprised if NFT standards comes out of that industry, because they are on it. I mean, they're building 3D, tons of data. Like, this needs to be figured out. I think think one benefit of crypto is the data is not so big. Like, yeah, we're sending bits and yeah, that data is insanely valuable. But I find this whole standards discussion, it might be beyond the scope of this, but that's really cool to hear you say the intercompatibility thing, because I kind of think about these designers or editors or, just people creating media. And it's like their life is so much harder when they can't interconnect and play nice, so to speak, with other formats. And I think when we're in this space and maybe we're in a certain corner of a certain chain or even a certain type of consensus algorithm, like our DPoS versus proof of work, it's so easy to get like almost that, like you said, like investor protect our stakeholders mentality. Whereas when you think like how you're saying, I just feel like that's so much better for the industry as a whole. So I don't like to predict, but light prediction here that this type of thinking is going to become a standard, because it's just making it harder for those future users if we don't come together nicely and learn how to play nice together. And then, by the way, put that all under a nice, tidy, and pretty UI as well, right?
Yeah, no, it has to go there, because if we don't, then we're just going to be stuck with I don't know how many users we have in the Web3 universe, but it's not many. Let's be frank. It's probably a couple of million, maybe 10 million. I don't know. Lots of people have multiple accounts. It's not many, and we need to make the user experience easy. We need to make things interoperable, and yeah, we need to make it feel like one singular network that everyone can understand and utilize.
What kind of people are you looking for to join or contribute to the Telos community? I mean, it seems like there's so many angles to this, whether you're a tech nerd, a coder, or even like more of a business or content creator or marketing or management person. Who are you looking for to join the Telos community or contribute?
Yeah, there's really so many different kinds of people that can come into the community and contribute. Obviously, developers is a big one. Developers build the projects, make the ecosystem lively, really push the barriers of what blockchain can do, and really, I think, bring the people in if they make interesting products. So developers, obviously, stakeholders who, want to purchase tokens and vote in governance and get involved that way is definitely very welcome. They help secure the network. They're critical. We want business people to come and join the foundation and make contributions. There's really a place for any traditional role to come into Web3 and make an impact. I mean, it's a little bit like the internet, and obviously, like, there were certain use cases that were popular early on, but really, as things open up, everything goes into the internet. Like, every industry has been affected by it. Every job role has been affected by it. And it's the same with Web3. I think whether you're a lawyer, a dentist, or chiropractor, or a sports person, you're going to be doing something in Web3. So I think it's important to get in there, get educated on how it could be used.
Well, I want to give a little bit of a shout out to the devs, not just incredible work like the gentleman at UX has done, but there's a gentleman named Kylan Hurt, and he was raving about Telos probably maybe over the last few years. I remember thinking, okay, this guy used to work at Edge Wallet and he's dealt with so many chains. So there's really something special, in my opinion, about looking at the people that are builders, what gets them excited. So, shout out to Kylan for putting you guys on my radar again, and really noticing like, wow, there's some serious adoption. You're getting developers on their own accord to adopt, the chain and wanting to build on it. So, hey, pro tip for everyone who's stuck with us that long, great way to really see which chains really cut the mustard, right? And so I definitely appreciate kind of mirroring or shadowing the people that are already sort of dialed into this as far as how to build it. And I think that is a great way for people, as you said, in those other traditional roles, to kind of get some eyes and get some sight. Because look, there's a little bit of fumbling around in the dark, and even the people that are in the know are kind of figuring it out as they go, and they'll admit that. So I do appreciate, being able to stand on the shoulders of giants, and they were standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of, like you said, Linux earlier. We have all this amazing code that even enables us to do a lot of this work in the first place. So really powerful stuff there. And if anyone wants to let us know what they think and what is attractive to them, definitely do. But yeah, before I close out, was there anything else I didn't ask you about that you wanted to mention?
We could go on all day. Yeah, I think we covered a lot. And I kind of welcome people to come check us out at telos.net. Come into our Telegram, come into our Discord. Just get involved. Start trying out some of the apps we have. Start deploying contracts. Feel welcome. We're a very welcoming community and we love new people. Want to talk about Web3 and what we can do with the world. You know, this is not just about the foundation. We're just one part of the equation. We have block producers. Community is incredibly important. They're the user base. They're the stakeholders. We want to see everyone. We want to talk to everyone and we want to shape the world.
Really great to reconnect just personally, and I'm even more excited that we got to put some nice content together to really help share who we are, and especially like hear from you. I think one thing I will say, definitely everyone check out those resources, but I love having a conversation people can come to, and there's tons of videos online as well from people like Doug Horn, who's also deeply involved in Telos, and yourself, and I believe AJ is your business development guy. So I encourage everyone, get a feel for the people. Hopefully this gave you at least a little bit of an idea of, yeah, like you said, that welcoming and openness, I think, does not go unnoticed. I think your adoption and numbers and just all the people involved is a testament to that. So it's really great to hear. And yeah, thanks for being a great example of how something can be very fledgling, still play big, but maybe still not lose sight of that original, vibe, frankly, from the early days. So yeah, thanks again.
Thanks, Aaron. Really appreciate it.
My layer one, your layer one, that layer one, this layer one.